30. And I've selected the Message translation from Eugene Peterson. Before we start reading our scriptures, I want to give you a little bit of a background on it. This is Jesus telling yet another parable, another story, indicating what the kingdom of heaven will be like. I think it's interesting. I don't know exactly how many different examples Jesus gave of what the kingdom of heaven would be like. But there are quite a few, and they are quite different in their nature. I think it's interesting to compare them and ponder, why did he say that the kingdom of heaven was like this on this occasion, and yet to another group of people say this is what the kingdom of heaven will be like? In this particular case, he tells a story about a master of a household who was going to go away on a trip. And he had 3 servants, and he gave each of his 3 servants different amounts of his money to watch over, to take care of while he was gone. To the first steward, he gave $5,000. To the second steward, he gave $2,000. And to the third steward, he gave $1,000. After a while, after a long absence, the master of those 3 servants came back and settled up with them. The one given $5,000 showed him how he had doubled his investment. His master commended him. Good work. You did your job well. From now on, be my partner. The servant with the $2,000 showed how he also had doubled his master's investment. Again, his master commended him. Good work. You did your job well. From now on, be my partner. The servant that was given $1,000 said, Master, I know you have high standards and hate careless ways, that you demand the best and make no allowances for error. I missed one of the verses. The servant then said, I was afraid I would disappoint you. So I took the money you gave me and I dug a hole and I buried it and I put it in there and I kept it until you returned. Here is your $1,000 back, every cent of it safe. The master was furious. That's a terrible way to live. It's criminal to live cautiously like that. If you knew I was after the best, why did you do less than the least? The least you could have done would have been to invest the sum with the bankers, where at least I would have gotten a little interest. Take the 1,000 and give it to the one who risked the most, and get rid of this play it safe who won't go out on a limb. Throw him out into utter darkness. I have to tell you, folks, sometimes when I'm reading the Bible, I get a little bit confused, even a little shook up. I mean, I see Jesus coming into this world to teach us a new way of looking at God, especially his fellow Jews, to teach them to look at God as a kind and benevolent, loving, caring God, instead of looking at him as an angry God that they needed to be fearful of. And then I come to a section like this, where Jesus seems to get wrapped up in money, and where Jesus seems to present an image of God that seems a little harsh. Throw him out into the darkness, this worthless servant that just didn't have any backbone to take a risk for us. But then I start thinking about it. And you see, I've come to the point where I believe that we have to be careful how we read and study and understand the scriptures. Some of my very, very good dear friends that are more conservative, if you will, than I am in my theology, have a very serious bent on taking the Bible literally. For example, just the story of the creation. 6 days to create and 1 day to rest. It couldn't happen any other way. It couldn't be 6 stages of creation and then a period of resting. And so I have different conversations with these wonderful friends of mine about whether to interpret this passage or that passage literally or figuratively. Well, when I look at this passage today, I come to believe that we need to understand this message from Jesus in a figurative manner, not a literal manner. I don't think that the point behind Jesus' story was about the money. I believe the point behind Jesus' story was about the attitude and about the perspective. These first 2 servants obviously had some talents and abilities and gifts that their master had noticed over the years of them serving him. The one that seemed the most gifted, the master entrusted him with the largest sum of his estate. The second one apparently had been quite the go-getter as well, maybe had done an outstanding job for his master in overseeing his cattle or his sheep or his wine press. And the master was impressed with him as well and entrusted him with a still significant amount of money, but not quite as much as he had invested in the first servant. Then comes Joe, the last guy on the list. And maybe he was kind of an okay worker, but didn't show much initiative over the years. He did what he was told, but wasn't a self-motivator, wasn't a self-starter. He wasn't like, Larry and Jim that were these go-getters out there ahead of the class and what they were willing and able to do for the master as they served him. But, the master decided to make an investment in Joe as well. And so he invested $1,000 with him just to see what would happen. Well, when he comes back, he's probably not all that surprised that Jim has doubled his $5,000 and giving him $10,000 back. Way to go, Jim. You did great. Now you can be my partner. Come enjoy the crop. Come enjoy the benefits and blessing of being my partner. In the same way with Larry, when Larry came and doubled his $2,000. I can understand why the master was disappointed when Joe came up and didn't have any increase in what the master had invested him with. But it wasn't the fact that he didn't double his money. It was his attitude. I was afraid, Lord, because I know you're a tough boss. I was afraid because I know that you reap crops where you don't sow. I know that you're a tough boss and you don't make any room for errors or mistakes. I was afraid I would disappoint you. You see, I think Jesus is trying to get through to the people of his faith, especially probably the priests and the rabbis. You don't have to be afraid of God. Instead of being afraid of God, You should love him, adore him, honor him, and praise him, and give him everything you got with what he has invested in you. Obviously, we all have different gifts, different talents, and different abilities. We're not all going to produce for God the same return on his investment. You know, there are plenty of preachers out there throughout history who have become legendary in their accomplishments and achievements for God. Billy Graham, I mean, my goodness, his crusades the world over. And even today in our contemporary world of preachers, there are so many preachers that stand out as leaders of mega churches, hundreds and thousands of members flocking to hear their message. I'm not that kind of preacher. I don't have the same set of skills and gifts that they've got. Am I going to wallow in fear in front of God just because my return on his investment in me as a preacher doesn't produce the same kind of numbers that these other legendary preachers, different people that they're reaching? No, I'm going to celebrate all that those preachers are doing for God, and I'm also going to celebrate and rejoice in the blessings and measure of God's Spirit and God's comfort and God's love and God's joy that I can share with the flock that he has entrusted me with. You folks in this room, and even the people that he brings across my path outside of being the preacher and the pastor of this church. The pastor who writes clergy, what's the name of it? Dynamic preaching manual, had a story that I think illustrates the difference between having this bold, dynamic, energized drive to do your best with what you've got, even if you suffer loss. Her name was Amy. Her name was Amy. Amy Purdy, P-U-R-D-Y. At the age of 19, she had a promising life in front of her, but she came home from work one day as a massage therapist, feeling like she had a cold and runny nose. She went to sleep. When she woke up, she could hardly breathe. Her hands and her feet were turning purple. She was rushed to the hospital in cardiac arrest. She had suddenly been infected with Neisseria meningitis. This is a rare form of meningitis that attacks the circulatory system. And in her cardiac arrest, she developed a quick septic infection that affected her circulatory system. The doctors told her that in order to save her life, they would have to amputate both of her legs below the knees. Now, can you imagine at the age of 19 with your whole life in front of you, how devastating that must be to hear that you have to have both of your legs amputated? Can you imagine the sense of loss that she felt? Even after the surgery, which was successful, she lost both of her kidneys and they had to remove her spleen. At that point, she only had a 2% chance of survival, but she survived. 2 years later, she received a kidney transplant from her dad. During all of this that she was going through, she set 3 new goals for herself for life. Number 1, I will never feel sorry for myself. Number 2, I will start snowboarding again. That was her favorite hobby. Number 3, whenever I figure this out, I want to help other people do the same. What was she focused on? Was she focused on the fear? Was she focused on her disability? Was she focused on her limitations and her losses? No, she was focused still on the investment that God had put into her. 1 year after amputation of both of her legs, she placed 3rd and received a bronze medal at the competition of snowboarding at Mammoth Mountain. She met, fell in love with, and married Daniel Gale. She and her new husband started their own nonprofit agency called Adaptive Action Sports to help and benefit other disabled athletes to compete. How many of you folks are Dancing with the Stars fans? Anybody out there like to watch dancing? Are you fans that watch every episode every year? 2018, we don't watch it, so I didn't know this. 2018, with prosthetic legs, she competed in Dancing with the Stars. She was the first double amputee to compete on Dancing with the Stars. And you would have thought maybe she might last the first 1 or 2 episodes. No, she made it all the way to the finals and came in 2nd place. She never scored less than 8 on any week that she was competing. Very few contestants on Dancing with the Stars can say, I never got less than an 8. She lost to an Olympic gold medalist by the name of Merrill Davis. Now, if you took all of her scores averaged out of a possible 30, her average was in the top 10 performers with 27.9 points out of a possible 30. The Olympic gold medalist who won the competition had 28.4 points out of 30, just 0.5 of a point better than Amy's was. She went on to become a model and an actress and a motivational speaker. She even became an author. You want to hear what the title of her book is? Her first book. I'm sure she's going to write more. This is the title of her first book. On My Own 2 Feet. From losing my legs to learning the dance of life. She could have wallowed in self-pity. She could have lived a life on disability. But no, she wanted to do more with what she still had. Even experiencing the sense of loss. You see, she was motivated to do all that she could. I don't expect any of us will ever have the kind of experience that would in any way be comparable or equivalent to what she lost or what she did after that loss. But we've all lost something, haven't we? We've all been through the different difficulties and challenges of life, haven't we? I was talking with Dave Berry just before church started, and I asked him permission to share a little bit of our conversation with you. I've known Dave Berry for I don't know how many years, and I've had the joy of being his pastor for the last 12 years. And I remember, not too long ago, whatever it was, 2-3 years ago, when Dave got suddenly hit with the COPD, how that knocked him down. And so we were talking today about that sense of loss that he experienced when he first when he had this at first. And, but Dave didn't wallow in that loss. He worked with the doctors, used the technology, used the equipment available to improve his breathing. COPD is something that you never get rid of. It stays with you. But what you do with your life with that COPD, and a large part has to do with how you face the situation. And just like this young lady, Amy, we've been talking about, Dave faced it, not wallowing in what he'd lost, but working with the doctors to see what he could do. Doctors have assured him he's done amazingly well. Why? Mostly because of his attitude. And you see, this is what I think Jesus wants us to hear in this story about the Master's investment in us. The translation or paraphrase from Eugene Peterson, while I really like it, actually left out one verse. According to the New International Version, verse 29, Jesus said, "For whoever has will be given more, and they will have it in abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them." This isn't about a mean-spirited, selfish God taking things away from us. This is actually part of a universal law of attitude. The law of attitude that says when we put ourselves out there, when we face our difficulties and our challenges, believing in God, believing in in Him walking with us through every one of our difficulties and challenges, we will have an abundance of His love, His help, His motivation, and His Spirit because we have that right attitude. But if we don't have that right attitude, if we don't have that right perspective about God, if we're afraid of Him and afraid of our life circumstances because of our lack of faith, we give up. We actually give up what we could have. And this is an unfortunate fact of life. If we don't face those challenges and difficulties, with that right attitude, we give up what we have. There's that verse. The servant said, "I was afraid I might disappoint you. So I found a good hiding place and secured your money. Here it is, safe and sound down to the last cent." You see, God has invested so much in each one of us. He created us and gave us life. These amazing bodies with all of the intricate network of nervous system and circulatory system, a brain to far surpass any other of His creatures. And it wasn't just that He invested that in us. He invested His own Son in us. He invested His Son's life with us, not only to teach us how to follow God, but to give His life on the cross for us, so that those parts of us that are lacking, those parts of us that are less than perfect, our faults, our failures, our sins, can all be washed away by the perfect blood of His Son. And He invested all of that in us because He loves us. So it's up to us what we're going to do with this investment that God made in us. Are we going to use it as a manner of trying to spread God's love throughout the world, and in that way grow closer to Christ and grow closer to God? I hope we use our investment wisely, because that's God's investment strategy for us. Amen. Today is one